Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our CV workshop, and thank you for participating. My colleague Lisa Jones and I will be taking this webinar, and I'll introduce myself in a minute, and so will Lisa. But what I wanted to say to everybody is that for some of you, this webinar will be a refresher, and you'll have probably heard us telling you these things if you've had a consultation with us or other people have told you, and for others there may be some new nuggets of information, and we'll talk about how to ask questions. So anyway, just to introduce myself, some of you may have met me, and I know some of the clients that I've talked to have said they're joining in on this webinar. My name's Fiona Jackson. I'm one of the career consultants at the Officers Association, and like the rest of you, we've all been working virtually since March. Just a little bit about my background. I served 8 years in the regular army and 3 years in what was the TA at the time. And since then, I've had both a commercial background, working mainly for John Lewis, but also other companies, and also worked in the third sector. My background has been very much around HR, so I've done a lot of recruiting, selection, talent management, succession planning, that sort of thing. So hopefully that stands me in good stead for able to support you with your CVs. Lisa, would you like to just introduce yourself?
Yes, of course. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session. My name is Lisa Jones. I'm also one of the career consultants here. My background is that I was in the army for about I left at my 9-year point, and I then went into the city, into banking, and I worked for UBS and Morgan Stanley. And since then, I then joined the OA, where I've been doing this since 2012. While I was in banking, I also did quite a lot of recruiting, and I hope that that helps me to understand what employers are looking for, and to help you get a good CV to get a good job. Yes, so just to give you a bit of context, there are kind of 3 main strands of what the OA does, and those can be seen in front of you there. So obviously, firstly, to help you get jobs, giving you access to our jobs board. Secondly, insight, so gaining knowledge through workshops and events. And then finally, getting a good network to support you. And I think your CV really is a key part of every part of this process. So, you know, I always say to people, you know, you need to get your CV sorted almost before you start any of these processes, because even if you're networking, you know, you might not think it's connected to a job, but if at the end of it, someone says to you, send me your CV, you know, you want to be ready to do that. And in terms of gaining knowledge, I mean, you know, if you want to understand what type of job you want, then you really need to understand yourself, and writing your CV will help you do just that. So what are we going to cover today? Well, you know, you can see a list in front of you, and hopefully that's going to be ticking your boxes as to what you want to get out of today's session. Firstly, we're going to cover off on what exactly is a CV. I mean, I don't know about you, Fiona, but quite some people that I see, you know, who've been in the military for 30 odd years have never even written a CV and don't really understand the purpose of it.
Oh, I remember talking to a client who joined the army as a boy soldier at 16 and was leaving at 55, and he'd never ever written a CV and was panicking about it. And I'm sure he had done much more challenging things within the military, but it can seem a mystery to some people.
Yes, so hopefully we'll help you uncover some of those mysteries today. We'll also talk about how to actually structure the CV and what type of CV the employers that we work with seem to prefer. We'll talk about how to identify your skills, because looking at what skills you have is a really key part of your CV. And as I said earlier, about understanding yourself. And some people do find this quite difficult, or find it difficult to separate their very military skills with what a civilian employer might be looking for. And that brings me on to, are your skills relevant? So, you know, I see a lot of people who want to do something when they leave the military that's kind of broadly connected to what they've done in the military, and that's fine. Those people might find it quite easy perhaps to move from the Army Medical Corps into a job in the NHS. You know, you can see the synergies there straight away, but others might have done a very technical role and actually want to leave that behind and do something different. So how do you look at your skills and your career and make it relevant to something completely new? So, and I think finally we'll look at, why am I not getting a response? Because I think that's a common cry. I quite often see people who say, I've applied for 60 jobs and I haven't even heard back from one of them. So, you know, there might be a reason why that's happening, and we'll try and help you understand that.
I think that's an important point, Lisa, because I do speak to clients who actually take that very personally and really don't necessarily understand the whole process of job applications.
Absolutely. So we'll try and help you with that. And then finally, as Fiona said earlier, we'll have a Q&A session at the end. So plenty of time for you to ask questions, and you can even put your hand up and we'll allow you to talk if that's what you'd like. So
yeah, what is this CV all about then? I mean, we obviously, you know, make quite a big thing of it. Employers want them. So for clients who've never had to write one before, what is it all about?
So I mean, the main thing is, the aim of a CV is to get an interview. So, you know, whether you're using a CV to actually apply for a job, or whether you're just networking, but you've got a CV to hand in case someone asks you for it, the eventual aim is to get an interview. So what your CV needs to do is essentially whet somebody's appetite and make them want to meet you properly, or to get you in for a proper interview. I mean, we say here there is no right or wrong CV. I mean, I think during our careers, Fiona, I think you'll agree, we've seen a lot of varied styles of CV, a lot of different CVs, very colourful CVs, and I don't just mean in terms of red, pink and green, but essentially that, you know, your CV is your CV, and I think you have to be happy with it. So I think, you know, you might get a lot of differing advice. I often see people who say, I've had so much conflicting advice on my CV and I just don't know what to do about that. And I think that can be a common problem, that different people have different views about CVs. But I think the most important person's view is your own. So you have to be happy with your CV. But also, do listen to the people that you talk to who work for the type of company that you're interested in working for. And if they tell you, we like to see a one-page snappy CV in a reverse chronological style, then listen to that and don't give them a 3-page functional style CV, because, you know, if they have told you that they like to see a certain type of CV, then it's important to respect that. And I think it says there, it's a competitive market, you get a few seconds to make an impression. I mean, we canvassed quite a lot of employers recently and asked them to tell us honestly how long they spent looking at a CV. And frighteningly, it was about 5 seconds. So, and I don't mean that's how long they spend in total looking at your CV, of course not. But in order to quickly make a snap decision, do I want to meet this person? Do I want to get this person? Shall I put them on the yes pile or the no pile or the maybe pile? You've got 5 seconds. So really, from the very word go, you need to be delivering a consistent message of who you want.
Sorry, Lisa, can I just come in there? I think you're right, because I see a lot of clients, or talk to a lot of clients who say they've got excellent communication skills, which you know, they probably have. But the thing is, with a CV, there is a certain style for writing a CV. It's not some sort of worthy staff paper or academic research report. So it has to be short and snappy. And I know myself, when I've been recruiting, I do literally spend a few seconds scanning a CV. But as you say, you would probably, if it whets your appetite, you'd probably then go back to it afterwards and say, yes, this is one I want to read more closely.
Yes, and I think, you know, that point there about identifying your USP. I mean, we'll talk a bit about that shortly, but I think, you know, I often write at the top of people's CVs, what is your message? And I think people need to make it clear what their message is very quickly on their CV, but also in person. So when you meet people, when you're networking and they say, you know, hi, good to meet you, what you say next is important. And a lot of people start with, oh, I'm an officer in the Navy, or I'm an army officer, and you know, obviously that's what you are now, but what do you want to be? What are you looking to be in the future? And of course, your background is that you've been in the military, and I'm certainly not advocating hiding that. And as I have seen some people where I've read their CV and I haven't even understood that they've been in the military. So I don't agree with that at all. But you need to think about what it is about your military career that you now bring to the table. And it's not going to be, you know, technical knowledge about weapons systems or aircraft or whatever it is, but it might be if you're working in the defence sector, but if you're looking to move outside of that, it's going to be the skills that you've developed along the way. Also, Fiona, I mean, we've talked a lot about reading job descriptions and things, haven't we? And, you know, as you look at the type of jobs that you might be interested in, you know, do look at job descriptions. What is the employer actually looking for? And try and speak to those needs, because the more relevant you can make your CV, the more it's going to speak to them and the more they're going to want to read it and obviously you.
Yeah, you're right, Lisa, because I think also I say to clients it's quite difficult to write a totally generic CV if you don't know what you're applying for. That it helps if you've got a good idea. Are you trying to be an operations manager, a logistics manager, or a project manager or something, rather than just trying to write a one-size CV that fits all.
Okay, so perhaps we'll talk now a bit about how to actually structure your CV.
Okay, thanks then, Lisa. Lisa and I are going to focus during this workshop on the reverse chronological style CV. Now, Lisa did mention a functional CV, but in almost all cases, we would recommend a reverse chronological style CV. And certainly when we talk to recruiters and to employers, they say, we like a reverse chronological style CV. So that's what we're going to focus on at the moment. It tends to be sort of industry best practice. And as Lisa said, there are lots of different styles of CVs, and you could even download templates from the internet or do it on your phone. But we're just going to talk about a basic reverse chronological style CV, which we know has worked for lots of people. So obviously, the first thing to start with is your name and your contact details. And I smile a bit there because actually I've seen quite a few CVs where people haven't put their contact details on or put them at the very end of the CV. Now, if yours is a 2-page CV and the second page gets lost, then the person doesn't even know how to contact you. So with your name and contact details, and these days you only need a mobile phone number and your email address. And some people do put their LinkedIn URL on it as well. Then you go into a short profile, and we'll talk more about that. Underneath, a bullet point list of key skills or key achievements. Talk about your career history, but obviously that's in reverse chronological order. Qualifications. Now, with qualifications, obviously you have to sort of again, look at what's relevant. You don't necessarily need to list every single qualification or course you've ever done in the military, and unless they're relevant. So the fact that you've done jungle warfare training, as I've seen on a CV, may be relevant for certain jobs, but not for others. So keep qualifications and sort of courses that you've done relevant. And then a little bit about personal interests. It's an interesting one, actually, on interest, because some people say, oh, don't bother with that. I quite like it as a recruiter because I think that it gives you a little point of contact. So, you know, I might look at somebody's CV and think, and then I'm interviewing them, think, oh, they like skiing. So I'll chat a little bit about skiing or something like that. But certainly what you don't need to include is any details in terms of you're married, your names of your children, your dog, and everything else like that. So just keep it very anodyne. It can include an additional section relating to your profession. So, for example, I've seen CVs where people have listed the papers that they published or the research that they've conducted, again, if it's relevant. And yes, I would include awards and decorations. And in fact, that just makes me go back to the very first thing. We're not in favour at the very top of the CV when you put your name to put a long list of post-noms after them. What I would say is only put something like an honour or award, so OBE or MBE, something, but not the fact that you're a member of the Institute of Leadership and Management. Those can go in the qualifications section. Lisa, anything else to add to that slide before we go on to the next one?
I just want to just add something about the personal and the interests bit. I mean, you know, the employers that I speak to, you know, some of them really have absolutely no interest in reading that bit at all, and in fact, you know, have no idea why people put it on there. But others really like to see things where you've added value. So, you know, if you've done some coaching of some children's rugby or something, or if you have done some voluntary work, or if you have run a marathon in aid of charity and raised money, or if you just give up your time to help others, people will really respond to that. Or, you know, if you're a school governor or a trustee of a charity, something like that. I think those kind of things can really add value and make people see a different side of you. But equally, I think sometimes if something chimes with the person who's reading the CV, like if you say that you're a qualified coastal skipper or something, and they really love sailing, then that's going to help to kind of break the ice when you meet them. So that kind of thing can help. But I would kind of avoid controversial things or things that people might not like or might take against. So, you know, if you've got hobbies that are a bit different, or something that people might, you know, if you know that they are a bit controversial, probably steer clear of things like that. But so I think do a bit of research, find out whether that company that you want to apply for even looks at that section, but it can add value, certainly. I would definitely say it can add value. So moving on, so the top of your profile, top of your CV, I call the top third of a CV the impact area. And I think it's the area that people are obviously drawn to straight away. And it's the area where hopefully people will get the most value from. And that's the aim anyway. I mean, when Fiona was talking about your name and contact details at the top of the CV, I mean, I've seen some CVs where the top third of the CV has been the person's address, you know, where they've got a really long address, something or other cottage, something or other lane, something or other road, about 3 different villages and postal districts. You know, that's really not necessary. And if all I've gleaned from looking at the top third of your CV is your address, which I'm never going to visit you in your home, it's not really relevant. So I would say the top third needs to be your name, contact details, a short profile, and perhaps your key skills or achievements, or perhaps a combination of the two. So what is this profile? Now, I talked a bit earlier about the USP, and I know that people who've done a career transition workshop might have heard of something called the 30-second elevator pitch. Now, what that is just something that you use when you're meeting people for the first time, you're introducing yourself. What are you going to say? And, you know, as I've said earlier, what is your message? And so I would say in your CV, you can use it in your CV, you can use it on LinkedIn, you can use it in person, as I say, when you're meeting people. About 4 or 5 sentences long, so not a huge paragraph, but enough information to help people understand a bit about you. Please don't start it with, I am a dynamic, motivated, flexible, versatile army officer, for example. Honestly, I'm sure Fiona will agree, if we had 10p even for every CV we see that starts exactly in that way, you know, I think you get to the point where you're almost rolling your eyes when you see it, because although clearly most employers really would love to have dynamic, motivated, flexible, versatile employees, who wouldn't? It doesn't really differentiate you, firstly. It's not factual, secondly. And finally, it doesn't really mean that much with no context. So I would say if you think you're dynamic, motivated, flexible and versatile, that's great. But how about showing it and demonstrating it in your CV rather than just saying those words and expecting people to believe them? Please.
Can I just add in there, because it's jumping back, and I totally agree with you about the dynamic, motivated, versatile, flexible, because if everybody uses them, they just become cliche. But actually, somebody's asked a question about post-noms, and it's a very relevant question because I mentioned it and you mentioned it. So somebody has asked a question. I'm a chartered engineer and chartered manager and applying for engineering ops management. So why would I not put my C-Eng and C manager as post-noms? Surely that sets me apart immediately as someone who already has the accredited qualities. And I don't know what you think, but I would say advocate putting just C-Eng if you're applying for engineering roles, but not a whole list of post-noms. Or in your impact first paragraph, you put, I am a qualified engineer. Just wondered what you think on that one.
Yeah, I mean, if you start your profile a qualified chartered engineer, you know, that's going to be quite powerful. But also, I think even if, you know, say you are a chartered engineer, but you don't actually want to apply for an engineering job, I still think that being a chartered engineer, it says something about you. It implies you know, you have a technical mindset. And I think those kinds of things can be valuable, you know, for an employer to kind of understand about you. So I think, I just think less is more. So if you just have C-Eng after your name, then yes, I think that's valuable. But if you've got about 5 or 6 things after your name, people are just going to switch off and they might miss one of those things which is valuable. So I think, I don't know if that's what
yeah, no, I would agree with that, because, you know, if we're saying that somebody's going to spend 4 seconds scanning a CV, then they don't want to spend the whole 4 seconds just scanning, you know, 6 different post-noms. But if the chartered engineer is the one that's most valuable, yes, you put that in. And I agree with you, less is more.
And also, you know, to become a chartered engineer is actually quite an achievement. So, you know, and as Fiona mentioned, you know, getting an MBE or an OBE is often the, you know, the highlight of people's career. So if it's something you're very proud of and you want to be a focal point of you, you know, when I said, what is your message? You know, if your message is, I am a chartered engineer and I'm really proud of it, then of course that needs to be upfront. So it's about thinking about what I want people to grasp about me in that quick impact area. And your name and your post-noms, of course, forms part of that top third impact area. So to go on to what else you should include in this. So I say obviously keep factual, but also convey your background. So what I mean by that is the environment that you've been working in, the level that you've been operating at. And by that, I don't just mean introducing yourself as an army officer, but you could say a chartered engineer with a background of, you know, 20 years serving as an army officer in locations around the world in challenging environments or something like that. So of course, get in the fact that you've been in the military, because I think that's very important, and it certainly is who you are, but not to lead with it. So lead with the chartered engineer or qualified program manager or whatever it is that you want to deliver initially, and then back it up and explain the environment. But also think about, you know, civilian people and what they might understand of being an officer in the Royal Navy. You know, they might think that all you do is just sit on a ship and sail around the world, you know, and they might think to themselves, well, what's that got to do with me? So, you know, whereas if you're an engineer and you're a naval engineer, it means you've worked with some pretty impressive pieces of equipment and some very technical things, and without your technical expertise, you know, those ships would not have been able to perform the tasks that they have done. So it's about conveying that kind of so what, and obviously we'll go into that later on in the session. But in terms of your profile, you know, as I say, 4 or 5 sentences long, keeping it factual. Think about your message, what it is you want to get across, a little bit about your background to give context. So the kind of level at which you've been operating, you know, if you're currently working in, you know, Army headquarters, then, you know, you're working at a strategic level, and get that across in your profile. If you have just come away from being a commanding officer or a captain of a ship, you know, that's a huge leadership role. So, you know, talk about the level of responsibility there and the leadership involved in that. And then, you know, sector experience where relevant. So, you know, if you're an engineer, obviously that needs to be an important part of it. Or, you know, if you are looking for a job in the defence sector or in logistics or in medical, and you've got experience there, then that's what needs to come out. Equally, if you've worked in a multinational environment and the role that you're going for is something akin to that, then make sure that comes across in terms of being relevant for the environment. Did you have anything else to add, Fiona?
No, I think that's great, Lisa. Thanks, because I was going to go on then just to talk about the career history. So, you know, yes, the profile has to have impact, but you have to be able to then back up what you've said by your career histories. Okay, so we're talking about the reverse chronological CV, and it isn't on this slide, but just one thing to remember: if you have had a long and distinguished career in the military, you only really need to go back 8, possibly 10 years in detail, because the things you've done, although it may have been very important, are not going to be as relevant to your job application, and also some of the technology or the things that you've used may be out of date. And that really then ties in with, if you can keep the CV to 2 pages maximum. For younger officers, some will do a 1-page CV, but you don't need to list in detail every single job that you've done, and you may just want to put something at the end as, you know, various roles as a junior officer in the RAF or whatever. Okay, so Lisa and I had a bit of a conversation about job titles before we started this session, because we do understand that some military job titles don't necessarily mean much to a civilian employer. And so, for example, obviously, you know, if you're in the Navy and you put down your officer of the watch and you're on the bridge, then of course other naval people will understand that, but you know, outside of the Navy, people may not understand that. You say you might want to put something like, you know, operations manager responsible for the daily routine of the ship at that time, or something along those lines. On the other hand, we also talked about, for example, if you were SO3J1 at brigade headquarters, well, again, that won't mean a lot to people. So you need to try and make sure that the job title means something, but also the scope of the job title as well. So again, to go back to my SO3J1 Brigade Headquarters, if you might put something along the lines of Administration and Planning Officer for the Brigade Headquarters. But if somebody didn't understand what a Brigade Headquarters was, what its function was, the number of people within the brigade, you need to give a quick sort of overview of the scope or the size of what you did, or maybe, you know, the value of the equipment that you managed and the readiness that you had to keep the equipment under, and so on. So but also be aware of not over translating your job title to make it seem something that it isn't. So Lisa would probably agree with me, but I've seen a number of CVs where people have put, you know, Chief Executive Officer, or actually what they meant was they were the commanding officer of a unit. You know, those don't necessarily equate. So try not to over simplify the job titles into, let's say, titles that don't actually equate within the civilian world. And if anybody's not sure, they can always ask us and we can help them with that. But use each job as a vehicle to showcase your skills and add bullet points that give evidence of the skills. So in your first part of the CV, if you've listed certain key skills, you must be able to show evidence of those within the career history. And the other thing, and this is more about the style of the CV rather than the substance, but block text is actually very difficult to read. So use or break down what you've done into bullet points rather than lots of chunks of block text, because that's difficult to read. And then on that, concentrate on the so what of your achievements. And by so what, we mean is, what value did you add, or what was the outcome of what you did? And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But we see an awful lot of CVs where people have just listed their tasks or responsibilities, but haven't actually said what the outcome of something was. So you could say, you know, you were responsible for maintaining let's say £3.6 billion of equipment, but you could be responsible for something but not actually doing anything. So if your £3.6 million of equipment was sitting in the hangar or in the dry dock, or on the, you know, in the regimental workshops, then that's actually not going to be a great deal. But if you say you're responsible for the equipment and maintained it so that it could deploy at 48 hours notice or something with 95% availability, then that would be important. Lisa, I've just got a question that's come up here, and I don't know what your view on this one is. It's somebody has asked, would you need to include rank at each role, e.g. Chief Operating Officer, Major? What's your view on that one?
I mean, I think, I mean, there's a famous thing where people were canvassed in the street and asked, you know, what's the highest rank? You know, is it a corporal, a colonel, you know, or whatever? And nobody had a clue, and people thought that a sergeant major was the most important, which arguably is true, of course. But, you know, they don't understand the difference between a general and a sergeant major, really. I mean, obviously, there are some employers that do understand that. So I think, you know, there are some employers that are very sophisticated in terms of military people. You know, they've got their gold ERS award winners. They, you know, they really understand. And, you know, if you've been promoted to major early above your peers, and, you know, it's quite, you know, you're obviously a flyer, then it's worth saying something like that. Whereas just, you know, a list of your ranks isn't necessarily adding value. Also, sometimes, you know, it might count against you, for example. So people might not want a very senior person, or they might think, oh, a colonel, oh, he sounds very senior. He probably wouldn't want to do this job because it's not that senior, and he'd start bossing everybody around, you know, whereas, you know, so you're obviously proud that you've reached the rank of colonel, but it might put somebody off. Whereas if you just explain what your job is, which is probably very relevant to the job that you're applying for, then that might be more valuable. So I think it depends on the audience, and you know, it's probably not a black and white answer.
I think thanks for that, because I think you're right, because obviously people, you're very proud of your rank, but for some people they might not understand the difference between a colonel and a corporal. So it depends on the organisation, I think. And also, and I'm sure some of the listeners are aware of this, that when you go out into civilian jobs, that a lot of companies have a much less hierarchical structure, and they're not worried about your rank. What they're worried about is, or concerned about is, can you do the job, and have you got the experience and the skills necessary to do the job? And that's much more important than rank. So I think
there's also been another question about would we recommend putting a civilianized version of the title in brackets next to the military title? So this chap gives an example: adjutant and REO, brackets, human resources manager and auditor. I mean, my point would be whether that's relevant to the type of job that you want to look at. So, I mean, I talk to a lot of adjutants, and when, you know, I look at their job that they've got, you know, all the things, and they talk about running the CO's diary, they talk about discipline and all this kind of stuff. And I say to them, you know, are those things that you actually want to, you know, carry on doing? You know, and, you know, someone who runs somebody's diary in the civilian world might be seen as a PA, for example, and discipline doesn't really come into the equation in the civilian world unless you work in a school or a prison, probably. So, you know, you've got to think, is this relevant? And most of the adjutants I talk to never want to do adjutantal type tasks again. And so I say to them, so why are you giving me chapter and verse of what an adjutant does, when really you should be talking about the significance of the role? You know, it's an important role. You're the CO's right-hand man or woman. You are, you know, a gateway essentially between all the subunit commanders. You're responsible for setting a lot of policy, understanding the needs of the whole organisation and making sure that everyone's opinion is heard. You know, it's all of that kind of thing, which I think is going to be a lot more relevant than talking about discipline and you know, CO's orders and running the CO's diary. So it's about thinking about how you describe your job. Also, I think, I mean, Fiona, you're better placed than me to talk about this, but, you know, human resources. So I think, you know, in the civilian world, HR is quite a specific discipline for which you have to be qualified. And so just being an adjutant or an REO doesn't really mean that you are an HR specialist.
I would agree, Lisa, because I see a lot of people who try and civilianise adjutant to HR manager, and as an HR professional myself, as an adjutant, you do some HR bits and pieces, but you're not an HR manager. So there is a danger of trying to over civilian. And somebody's actually just asked the question about, you know, what might be the equivalent military roles to an MD, CEO or CO. There may not be equivalent roles, and I think you have to, everybody will understand commanding officer, and as long as you explain the scope of that role, I don't think you actually need to try and civilianize the role. And also somebody's asked the question is about, shouldn't we try to civilianize everything? Well, if you civilianize everything, then the CV becomes so bland that, you said earlier, then people don't even understand you've been in the military. So I think there has to be a balance of not including lots of acronyms and jargon in job titles and what you say, but actually not making it so bland that somebody doesn't understand you're in the military.
No, and I agree absolutely. And I mean, somebody said, you know, in a small company, would an MD, CEO or COO not be equivalent to even a junior officer's role? So, I mean, you know, if you're a platoon commander, my recommendation would be to call yourself a platoon commander, and then underneath that just put a team leader of 30 people, you know, and explain that you actually did all their appraisals and their career progression, but also, you know, you were definitely the kind of the leadership role model there, and just explain the role. So I think it's about how you, and also it's about what you want to convey as well. You know, if you hate managing people and you never want to write another appraisal in your life, then, you know, it's probably wise to steer away from talking about it in your CV.
Yeah, just a final question on that before I go on to the next slide. So, and this comes up quite a bit about how do you convey jobs, operations that are sensitive in your career history, because obviously there are people who've worked with special forces, with the intelligence services, and to a certain extent I would say you'd have to be guided by what you're allowed to write. So you might have to seek specific advice on that, or you might have to be sort of fairly anodyne, you know. I mean, I don't think there'd be anything wrong in saying, you know, you're the operations manager of a special forces unit, but you would have to obviously be very careful about what you wrote in terms of the deployments, location, things like that. So,
but equally, my view is that it's not really relevant to talk about, you know, the actual operation or what it was called or the detail of it. So I think, again, you need to look at that so what. So what is the so what that you were involved with special forces? It means that, you know, you've had to pass some, you know, significant tests in order to be, you know, admitted into that closed circle. You are probably vetted to a very high standard. You're very trustworthy and integrity, you know, and so on. So it's about kind of conveying the so what of it, and not necessarily, you don't necessarily need to give chapter and verse of the operation that you were involved with. It's, you know, thinking, well, why does, what you need to say is, you know, operations manager for a sensitive special forces unit, but then talk about, you know, and perhaps that might mean that, you know, you're at a very high readiness state, or that you were deployed a lot away from your family, but also on complex multinational missions. You know, it's about getting the reader to understand what that means, and largely what that means won't really have anything to do with the real nuts and bolts of the actual special forces.
Yeah, I agree with you, because I remember speaking recently to somebody who was logistics officer with special forces, and I said, well, we don't, the reader doesn't need to know where the kit went, but what you can say things like is, you know, ensure that the deploying troops or units or personnel have the correct specific equipment to complete the mission, and you can, you know, be as broad as that. Some of you may have already heard of CAR or STAR statements, and I talked about bullet points, using bullet points rather than lots of block text. But when you write your bullet points, you need to start them with action points to show that you've delivered something. So as I said before, rather than saying responsible for equipment, you could say maintained X amount of equipment at 48 hours notice. And also in the style of writing for your CV, I think it's a bit of a military thing, but lots of people write in what I would call a passive way rather than an active way. So they would start by saying leadership and management of a RAF squadron or whatever, and yet if somebody asks you the question, what do, you wouldn't say leadership and management of a squadron. You'd say, oh, I led and managed, or I lead and manage. So write in an active way, or delivered something, or maintained something, or implemented something, and you could follow that with which led to or resulted in X, Y, and Z, and the outcome of what you've done. On that point, I know some people say to me, oh, if they're working maybe on a big procurement project, in Abbey Wood that by the time they've left their posting, the project hasn't been delivered, but you could still say it led to achieving the first milestone, or getting a financial approval, or getting through the first gateway, or whatever like that. So you might not have to say the actual very end result, but sort of where you got the project from. And in terms of the CAR statements, or the STAR statements, for those of you who haven't heard of that before, then we're talking here about what was the challenge, what was the action that you took, and what was the result. And also with the STAR, similar: situation, task, action, and results. And try, when you're talking about action, and I know again it's a very military thing to say, well, when we did this and we did that, but say, but what did you do to make that happen? So if your unit, successfully passed some sort of audit, what was it that you did to ensure that happened in terms of your management and your leadership? And so it's about the so what, because when you come to an interview, the person interviewing you doesn't want to know what we did. They want to know, but what did you do to make that happen? So be quite detailed about that. And I know it goes slightly against the grain. Also, people sometimes say to me, but I can't give a so what in terms of, I didn't increase sales by X or Y, or make more profit or whatever. No, you can't, but you can talk about when you met the timelines, when you made something more effective or more efficient, you reduced wastage, you increased retention, all of those things. So you may not be able to put an absolute monetary figure on something, but you could talk about what improvements or efficiencies that you've made. So have you anything else to add to that, Lisa, before you go on to the key skills?
Yeah, I just want to say that, if somebody's looking at your CV, for 5 or 10 seconds, they are just going to be skimming it. And so the whole point of using a bullet point is to help the reader, to draw their attention to that. So if you start your bullet points with, let's, as an example, say I'm skimming a CV, and the 3 bullet points that stand out to me are streamlined, maximized, transformed. I don't even need to know what it is that you streamlined, or what opportunity you maximized, or how you transformed a project or whatever. I've just taken away those 3 words, and I've got an impression of somebody who makes things happen. And so I think language can be really important. Whereas if you start your bullet point with kind of quite a complex explanation of this, and this is where perhaps it's a bit misleading here to talk about STAR and CAR, because I personally would not start the bullet point with the situation or whatever. I'd go straight into the action with the action words. But think about the STAR and the CAR, and think, why am I telling somebody this? And if it doesn't have a CAR or a STAR that relates to it, ask yourself, well, do I need this bullet? Why am I telling them this? Does it really help convey my message?
I think that's a good point, Lisa, because I think the CAR and STAR is really to help you think about what you delivered, or you implemented, or you maximised, or whatever, and where you might want to go into more detail about the particular challenge would be in an interview situation. So if you've whetted somebody's appetite again in the CV and you get to interview, they might pick up on that there.
Yeah, absolutely. So the whole idea of the CV is to get you to that interview, as we said at the beginning. But absolutely, just think about that. So what? Why am I telling somebody this? Is it relevant? Does it help underpin my message? Is it going to make them want to meet me to hear the rest of the story?
Yeah. We're going to move on now and talk about identifying key skills. So Lisa, I'll hand over to you for that one.
Yeah, we put this at this stage, although obviously on your CV it would perhaps come after your profile. But really your key skills are essentially what you're selling an employer. And, if your 30-second elevator pitch is your profile, the key skills are, you know, the next stage of that. I remember someone once asked me, you know, what 5 things can you bring to this organisation? And really, that's probably what this key skills bit is. It's thinking, what are the main things that I am bringing to the party, that I am selling, that I want an employer to buy when they effectively hire me? So, I mean, this slide is just an example of some things, but to get down to it, you know, you need to think about, what are you good at? But crucially, what do you want to do more of? And if I hark back to perhaps an example of being an adjutant, you know, you might have been brilliant at being an adjutant, but if you don't really want to run anybody's diary, or, you know, do any kind of HR tasks again in your life, or write appraisals, then perhaps have a long think about whether you want to put those kinds of things into your key skills. So it might be that you were really good at them, but if you don't really want to do them again, and you're not looking for a job that would want those skills, then just do think about whether those are the things that you really want to be selling. And also, what kind of skills are sought after by the type of role you're interested in? So, you know, if you're looking at logistics operations roles, just look at loads of jobs online. Look at, you know, even if you've got no intention of applying for them, you know, even if they're in, I don't know, Glasgow and you live in Cornwall, you know, you're obviously not going to be commuting there or relocating necessarily, but it's not necessarily looking at these jobs in order to apply for them. It's looking at them in order to get a feeling for the language. What skills are they looking for? What are the essential and desirable criteria in those job specs? And then look at your CV, or reflect on yourself and your career. Have I done those things? And if, when you're reading a CV, a job description, sorry, you are nodding your head and saying, yep, I've done all of this stuff, brilliant, I should apply for this job, will the person reading your CV also be nodding their head? So you might know that doing a certain role in the military means that you had to do that kind of thing every day. So say you've been a company 2IC or something, and you did a lot of planning and a lot of spreadsheets and a lot of, you know, planning for the whole company to go on exercise or whatever. But if you haven't actually explained that in your CV, and the job description is looking for somebody who's got excellent planning skills, that they're not going to know, oh, well, he was a company 2IC, so he must have done quite a lot of planning. You know, you need to tell people that. Also, I say that, own your skills and don't just list the things. So I think one of the biggest bugbears of some employers is that people just list a load of skills. So, like, for example, they might say project management, and then after the phrase project management, they then write seeing a project through from inception to completion. And then the next thing, you know, that doesn't act, you know, if I want to Google project management and see what it involves, then that's great. But, or look it up in the dictionaries. People complain about people using dictionary definitions. Don't do that. If you want to say project management and you want to amplify that, which I would advise, then have a brief line explaining the type of project, the scope of projects that you're comfortable working on, and, you know, help them to understand why you say you're good at project management. And I don't mean a huge paragraph, because that's what the rest of your CV is for, is to illustrate these key skills. But give them a little taster of the type of projects that you're, you know, if you say leadership, you know, don't just give a dictionary definition of leadership. Tell them, you know, how many people you're comfortable leading or managing, and give it, make it a bit personal. Your name is at the top of the CV, so the CV is about you. It's not about telling me what the dictionary definition of leadership and management or project management or operations management is. And if you've got qualifications, then, you know, that's perhaps you could, if you are a qualified project manager and you've got APM or Agile or whatever it is, then you could put that there, you know, to show that, you know, you're not just saying project management. I once saw a CV and a guy had put project management as one of his key skills, and then he never mentioned project management again in the whole CV. There were no projects listed there or described in any way. And I said to him, why did you say project management was one of your key skills? And he said, well, I just thought that that's the kind of thing that employers would look for. And that might be true, but if you have got no evidence of project management, then an employer is just going to feel cheated that he's been drawn in to read your CV by the headline of project management, and then there's no evidence of it. So make sure that it is something that you can talk about. And I say they're skills, not qualities. So, you know, a good sense of humour is not a skill. You know, integrity is not really a skill. You know, these are things that you perhaps do bring to the party, but they're probably not quantifiable things that you can put under a key skills heading on a CV. If it's important to you, something like integrity or a good sense of humour, then you can weave it into the CV, of course, either in your profile, or you might, you know, qualify it under, you know, your leadership or your communication skills or something, but I wouldn't use it as a standalone point. And finally, what do you need from a new career? I mean, we've perhaps touched on this already, but, you know, think about the things that you actually want to do and the things that you want to do more of, and not what just is advertised. So, you know, do spend time looking at job descriptions and looking at the type of skills that are being sought after, but also really think about yourself. What is it that you want? And, you know, do you want to do more of that? If you're leaving the military because you hate, you know, being deployed on operations or being away from your family, you know, do you want the type of job that might mean that you have to do that? So, you know, it's about not just finding a job, but finding a job that you really want.
Lisa, somebody's just asked a question about skills. What is the difference between key skills and achievement? I've been informed by another CV writing workshop that I need to place my key achievements instead of skills. And I don't know what you think, but I think if you list too many key achievements at the top, then you become repetitive, and it is probably best to include those within the career history, but the skills are the things that are hopefully aligning to what the job wants, but you're then illustrating those with your achievements.
Absolutely, but I just think there's no harm in combining them. So if one of your key achievements is you know, running some hugely successful project, then have under the heading, you know, key skills, have say key skills and achievements if you want, and have project management in bold, and then describe this this key achievement that you're hugely proud of. Or, you know, if you were awarded the MBE for your leadership, you know, in a difficult situation, then have one of your key skills as leadership, and then qualify it by saying awarded MBE for exceptional leadership under pressure. Or I would say combine the two.
Yeah.
I think, as Fiona says, a huge list of achievements with no context is a bit meaningless. But if you combine the two and keep them short and sweet, and then give further detail in the body of your career history, I think it can be very powerful and certainly personal.
I agree. Okay, thanks then, Lisa.
So this is just a slide to perhaps touch on some of the tools to use when you're thinking about what your key skills are. And these are all tools that the career consultants at the Officers Association can use to help you. You know, these are exercises that have been developed by career experts to help you understand what it is that you'd like to do and what you'd be perhaps good at. So, you know, I list some of these there. So if you're really struggling to identify your key skills and you feel that you could benefit from some help in that, then please do get in touch, and one of us, Fiona, myself, or our colleague Jo, would be really happy to help you to understand yourself a bit better.
So I'm just going to talk about are your skills relevant and how to translate your military experience into relevant skills. And then Lisa and I are actually going to give a couple of examples from things that we've seen in CVs. We do often hear people say, oh, but, you know, that recruiter or that employer didn't understand my experience. And yet, you know I've got some very valuable experience that I could do this job. But in a way, it's not up to the employer or the recruiter to understand your experience, your military experience. It's up to you, or the onus is upon you to help your reader explain what it is. And as I say, we're going to give some examples of this. So you need to almost go out of your own sort of persona and look at the CV through somebody else's eyes and say, does this make sense to them? So first of all, you know, the so what, why are you telling them about your military experience? So I mentioned, for example, somebody putting down on a CV that they've done jungle warfare training. Well, if the job entails it, then that may be relevant, but then you may have used certain skills when you were doing your jungle warfare, having to make decisions quickly, operating in very challenging conditions and so on. So you need to try and take out the military terminology, but then put it into what it is your reader wants. So don't just describe your roles. I think we've said this on a number of occasions. Focus on what you're selling, i.e., why would it be that an employer would want to employ you because of what you're selling, and why might this be relevant to a new organisation? And I think to help you, the best thing to do is read the job description and the person's specifications. And certainly, if you know you're going to be applying for project management roles, or you know you would be applying for logistics management roles, then as Lisa suggested, you can go onto the internet and get a job description and a person's specification of those, and then try and fit what you've done into that. Obviously, you can't make up things you didn't do or you don't have, but try as much as possible to cross-reference your military experience into the civilian terminology. And Lisa's now going to go on and just give a good example of what she's read in CVs.
Yes, so this is one of my personal favourites, and I hope any gunners out there are not offended. I served with the gunners myself and have lots of friends who are gunners, and indeed my brother.
I was a gunner.
And Fiona was a gunner, so hopefully they won't be offended. But I do see a lot in gunner CVs responsible for the delivery of lethal firepower. Now, of course, you know, that is essentially what an officer in the Royal Artillery might do. But if you imagine a person in an HR environment who's got no knowledge of military people, or very limited knowledge of military people, what are they going to think when they read that? Is that going to sound like something that they need in their organisation? And, you know, I would say the chances are it probably isn't. So, you know, without, to stop being flippant here, you've got to think to yourself, how does this benefit an organisation? So if you are delivering lethal firepower to a brigade formation, for example, what are the skills that you need to have in order to effectively deliver that? So you perhaps need to think about the brigade or battle group as your client, you know. So first of all, you have to understand what they need. Why do they need the lethal firepower? Where do they need it? When? How often? You know, and then you obviously need to plan and make your plan, or decide how this is going to happen and who needs to be involved. You need to have excellent communication skills, get all the stakeholders involved. Who else might be impacted from this? Who needs to know that this is happening so that they don't start panicking? An excellent eye for detail. Quite frankly, if that lethal firepower were to go into the wrong location, that would be a big impact. So you need to have excellent risk management skills and, as I say, an excellent eye for detail. But also, fundamentally, it's about providing an excellent service. So it doesn't matter whether it's lethal firepower or whether it's, you know, customer service in terms of answering the telephones or, you know, going and delivering a presentation to a financial services company to tell them about how marvelous your IT equipment is. So it's about understanding client needs, communicating, building relationships, understanding the importance of involving stakeholders. It's about all those things. So hopefully you can understand that if I start telling a prospective employer about all my skills in these areas, rather than this standalone statement, the delivery of lethal firepower, hopefully the HR person who's reading my CV is suddenly going to start thinking, actually, this person could be quite useful. He or she sounds like they've got some really excellent skills that our company could really benefit from. Whereas the delivery of lethal firepower, I mean, firstly, the word lethal might just put them off. And, you know, firepower, what does that mean? You know, people start thinking about fireworks or, you know, anything that is totally irrelevant. So you've got to try and think, what will somebody understand of what I'm saying? And what, crucially, what do I want them to understand? And have a real think about that. So Fiona, you're going to do another example.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about being a pilot, but just before we do that, Lisa, somebody did actually put in the chat box that they were a gunner. So whoever that was, I hope they're not too offended. But as I said, I was a gunner for 3 years in the reserves. So I'm going to talk about the skills of a pilot and how do you translate those, and also how do they benefit an organization. And actually this is quite a topical one at the moment, and this could apply to pilots from all three services: fixed wing, rotary, naval pilots, RAF pilots and army pilots. And also at the moment, I've been speaking recently to pilots who have been made redundant or under threat of redundancy, i.e. they became commercial pilots. So you might be a pilot and you might be thinking, I loved my military flying, but I don't want to go and fly EasyJet to Malaga. Sorry, that's very flippant, but you know, I have heard people say that. But I want to use the skills that I gained as a pilot in another role. Or also recently, as I say, I've been talking to pilots who have been made redundant, and they're thinking, well, there are going to be no pilot jobs around at the moment, so what else can I do? And how can I use my skills? Now, this list is not definitive, and probably those of you who are pilots could give me other skills, but Lisa and I had a sort of chat about this and think, well, if you're a pilot, what do you have to do? Multitasking under pressure, okay, analysis of information and decision making. You're probably getting lots of different information coming in, and you've got to make very, very fast decisions. Operating in a fast moving, high risk environment where safety and to human life is important. Communication and relationship management. You're communicating with air traffic control, you're communicating with other pilots who are flying with you. Certainly it shows a degree of technical aptitude, because you have to be able to deal with some very sort of highly valuable and technical equipment, and also problem solving in short time frames. And that could be actually you're having to make those decisions on your own if you're flying a fast jet on your own. So to me, there are lots of skills that people gain, say, as a pilot that are particularly relevant in other organisations. And it may be, say, another area of transport like rail, or it may actually be in something completely different, in terms of a big commercial organisation wanting to come up with some sort of business continuity plan and identify the risks that they're under. So don't think that just because you're one thing in the military that doesn't equate to something else in civilian life. So Lisa, have you got anything to add to that one, or would you go along with what I've said there?
Absolutely. I just think that, it's about thinking a bit more widely about what you do and how that might benefit another organisation. And, without exception, every single military person has got fantastic skills that are going to benefit, a whole raft of different organisations. But it's just about being able to talk about those rather than just describing your jobs. And I do often see CVs that are just a list of their job spec. So you've just got to try and sit down and think, in that job, what did I do? And was I any good at it? And what am I proud of? And why am I proud? So it's just about having to think a little bit more about things.
Lisa mentioned at the beginning that we were going to cover why am I not getting a response. Now, there are a number of reasons, but actually one of the main reasons might be you're applying for the wrong job, that you've looked at the job and you've decided it's a job you want, but actually when you analyse it, you just don't have the skills and experience for that role. Or I've also seen people say, well, I just more or less apply for anything and everything because I just wanted to practice getting my CV out and making applications. Or somebody else saying to me, I don't really know what the right job is, but if I see it, I'll apply for it. And so, but it's really important that you work out from all the things that we've said, what sort of jobs that you want to apply for, and ensure that you're looking at the right jobs where your skills and experience match what they want. So other reasons apart from applying for the wrong job, you may not have tailored your CV to the specific role. So again, some people think, well, I've done my CV, it's a generic CV, I'm just going to send it out for every role. But you may need to do more than that. You may not have matched your skills to those of the job. So in a generic CV, you may actually have a longer list of skills, but you only need to pick out those that are relevant for the role that you're applying for. Sadly, your CV may have been filtered out electronically, and so the computer program may be looking for all those people with APMP and Prince 2. And if you haven't got that on your CV, even though you've done a lot of project management, you could be filtered out right away. Or you may have been filtered out just by the junior person in the HR team being told to only pick those CVs where the person has said they've got Prince 2 and APNP. And sadly, that happens. You may not actually have the right qualifications or experience. I think there is a thought with a lot of people that they think if they've got some of the qualifications or experience, it's worth applying for the job. And to a certain extent, let's say if you've probably got 80 to 90% of what's needed, then you may, yes, apply for the job. But there are other things which could be a deal breaker. So if the person's specification and the job advert says you must be fluent in a certain language and you don't even speak that language, then there is no point applying for the job. So you've got to look at what is absolutely essential for this job and do I have that? Your CV may be too long and difficult to read. We have gone on about somebody spending 4 seconds scanning your CV, but if you submit a 6-page CV, then nobody is going to read it. Your reader may not understand your skills and experience, and we try to talk a lot about how you translate your skills and experience. And the other thing is, you may just have been unlucky and 600 people applied for the job and you just didn't get through the first sit because there were too many people with even more relevant skills and experience that you have. But to go back to what I would say at the beginning is don't take it personally. Obviously, you have to learn from what you've done, but it would be very unlikely for a company just to give you feedback on why your CV didn't make the first sift, because companies generally do not have time to do that. There is a question that's just come up, which I'm going to read out. So, do we have any best practice or further advice for helping your profile section immediately stand out for the 5-second scan, especially noting the point about irrelevant adjectives? I've found this especially difficult when applying for roles through ex-military schemes, which the majority of applicants have done similar roles. And yes, that might mean because there are lots of people who have done similar roles, you just don't get through the sift. Lisa, I know you've done a bit of work on this with certain of the top strategic consultancies who are looking for CVs that stand out, even though people have done similar jobs. So I just wondered if you wanted to pick up on that one.
I mean, I think it kind of depends what level you're at and what type of job you're going for. So, I mean, I would say some of these ex-military schemes are probably not even interested in you writing a profile. So they want a one-page CV, they want your name at the top, then underneath that they want your academics, and they might have specific requirements around degree levels, even specific universities, or any kind of higher level education specifics that they want, and that needs to be up front. And then really, some of them will look for things like, you know, when you were at Dartmouth or Sandhurst or wherever, did you have, were you in the top, 2%? Did you win the Sword of Honour? Did you win any prizes? When you've been promoted, have you been consistently promoted ahead of peers or given jobs that are jobs that others might have gone for but not got, but you got because you had the right profile? So it's about conveying that kind of thing, a kind of track record of delivery and excellence and achievement. So if you were to write some kind of profile in this type of context, then I would be writing that kind of stuff. The fact that you've got a first-class honours in your degree, or you've been consistently selected for top-level jobs, or promoted ahead of peers, or won prizes, or whatever it is. So, basically these schemes are super competitive and they want to hire the best. So you've just got to help them understand why you would be an asset to their organisation, and bringing out the things that you're most proud of. Or if that's not the case and you haven't got any of those things to say, which, let's face it, most of us don't, then you just might want to talk about the things that make you stand out and make you different to others. And you might have done, perhaps even if you're a relatively junior officer, but you were selected to do a 6-month secondment somewhere, or you've run an exercise in Kenya or somewhere, or in Canada or somewhere that others for a fact that some of your peers haven't had the opportunity to do. Now's the chance to kind of showcase that kind of thing that gives you a different perspective. And I always remember when I left the army and I went into financial services, my first job was with Morgan Stanley, and I was just really struck by how there weren't a lot of military people in Morgan Stanley at that time, and my background was just so unusual, and the things that I'd done in my career were so different and so unusual compared to the guys who just left school or university and gone straight into that bank and had just sat there for the last 5 or 6 years. What had I been doing for the last 5, 6, 10 years? I'd been doing some really interesting and exciting things. And it's about perhaps trying to get some of that across in your CV.
I think that's a good point.
That's helpful.
Yeah. because or even the size and scope of something. So I think I said to you that I was talking to somebody recently who'd commanded a naval flying base, and trying to give the let's say the context of that in terms of the number of sorties, the number of personnel going through the airbase, the busyness of it, equal to a sort of regional airport flight activity. Anything that makes you stand out in terms of the context of what you've done is important. Lisa, you're going to go on to sort of just add finally to why am I not getting a response, and then we've got any further question and answers. So shall I hand over to you for talking about networking now?
Yeah, so I just think, obviously Fiona's points earlier about why you haven't been getting a response are certainly valid. And I think the biggest one probably is the computer says no thing, as in you will have uploaded your CV onto some site, and for whatever reason, your CV just didn't make the electronic sift. So my response to that is get a real person to look at your CV. And how do you do that? Absolutely, network. If you're applying for a job in an organisation, your first thing that you do is to ask yourself, do I know anyone who works there? And if you personally don't know anybody, can one of your connections, one of your friends, family, people you've served with, even go back, people that you were at university or even school with, do any of them know anyone who works there? And the easiest way to do this detective work, if we want to call it that, is to use LinkedIn. And if you're not sure about using LinkedIn, please do make an appointment with us at the OA, and we can help you on an individual basis, or we do run workshops to help you with LinkedIn and get the best out of this tool, because I think there will be people out there who can help you, and the ex-military network is outstanding. I mean, it really is fantastic. And if you're not making the best use of people who have already left the military and are in various organisations keen to help, then you're just not giving yourself the best advantage. Also, I think the next point to make is that there are a lot of jobs that are either never advertised, or certainly if they are advertised, they will be known about internally within an organisation before being given that wider external exposure. So you need to be hearing about those jobs when they're in the planning stage. You need to be chatting to somebody who says to you, listen, in 3 months' time, we're looking to expand this team and we're going to be looking for a new team leader. Are you interested? That's not a job that's advertised. That's not a job that's out there. That is a job that's in the planning stages, and you need to be the person that they think of when that job finally gets signed off and given the funding. So I think, there's a lot of work that you can be doing before you even apply for a job. I mean, I say here, get a referral. So a lot of companies will operate an internal referral scheme. And that means that they will give their existing employees a financial incentive for referring somebody. And that person doesn't have to be somebody that they've known for 20 years, who's godfather to their children. That could just be somebody that they had a coffee with 2 weeks ago, or perhaps more appropriately in this environment, a Zoom chat with two weeks ago. And that person can be somebody that they were really impressed by, thought was a really, excellent fit, had the right kind of attitude and background and everything. And they just want to say to the hiring manager, listen, I met this guy last week, 2 weeks ago, really impressive, really liked the way he came across. Would you consider him for your role? I'll give you his CV. And they'll put your CV forward. I read some scary statistics the other day that said if you apply for a job that you've seen advertised, you're already too late, because the chances are they've already got people in mind for that job. So give that some thought. I'm not saying that is black and white and that is the case, because clearly, plenty of people apply for jobs that are advertised, and are successful. So I wouldn't give too much credence to that. But I think the premise is worth thinking about. You know, do you want to be playing catch up or applying for a job when 200 other people are also applying for it? Or do you want to be in there when it's in the planning stages? And I would suggest, you know, you would want to be in the latter category. So definitely network, network, network. The OA has got an excellent network of ex-military people that you can tap into. And if you're not sure how to do that, do let us know and we'll help you. But, you know, LinkedIn really is a fantastic tool, and you can really get access to plenty of helpful ex-military people through that tool, so do use it. I know there are people out there who are probably a bit nervous about LinkedIn, about, you know, security and so on, and, you know, that's what our workshops on LinkedIn, or even a one-to-one session with a career consultant, we can perhaps help you understand how best to use it and how you can make it work for you.
There are a couple of questions come up, Lisa. So I can take the first one and you the second one, if that's okay. But I'll just, sure. The first one is, you know, how do we avoid career gaps, i.e. a job that does not add value to one's profile? I don't know what you think, but I think it's important that you have to account for gaps. So if, for example, you've taken a year off sail around the world, then you would have to say that. But also what you might want to say is that, and I quite often talk to women who say take a maternity leave, so there is a gap, but they could put during this time, you know, just say, to explain the gap, say, well, I studied for my financial advisor qualifications or something like that. And if it's a job that doesn't add value to the profile, I still think you have to account for the gap, but you might not need to say too much about it. The trouble is, if you do have a gap, somebody might assume the wrong thing and think you've been in prison or something like that. So yeah, I think you need to account for gaps. I don't know, Lisa, if you've got anything to add to that.
I think sometimes, I mean, it depends what you mean by a gap, because I mean, I think I see a lot of people who feel the need to account for every single month of employment on their CV. And I personally would say, don't worry about that. I just keep it to the years. Don't bother about saying, you know, September 2012 to April 2014. You know, we don't need to know it. Just say 2012 to 2014. And, you know, if there's a few months, like, so say you finished a job in April 2014, but you didn't start a new job until January 2015, I think, you know, your next job will be 2015 to present or whatever. And I think no one's going to even ask a question there. So I think you can help yourself by not kind of pointing out 2 or 3 or even 6 month gaps here and there. Also, I think lots of people leave the Army or the Navy or the Air Force after 20, 30, whatever years. And frankly, if you want to take 6 or 9 months off, I think you jolly well deserve it. And I don't think anybody would bat an eyelid about that. But in terms of a job that doesn't add value, I mean, I talk to quite a lot of people who, after they resign, they then get given a kind of, you know, a fairly, not rubbish job, but a job that they're perhaps not that enamored of for their last you know, year or so. And that's the job that's, you know, reverse chronological top on their CV, and they feel very disgruntled about that. But I think, as Fiona says, I think you kind of have to say that that's your job, but try and think about it in a positive way, because an employer is interested in who you are now and what you are now, as in your current role. And so it's up to you to focus on the positives about that job and try and see it in a more positive light. And if you're struggling with that, that's certainly something that we at the OA can help you with. I've helped a number of people look at their jobs differently or describe them in a different way, so that they feel more confident and happier about them. I mean, it depends what you mean by a job that doesn't add value. I mean, if it's kind of going a bit off piste, as in it's not consistent in line with your message, you've been doing logistics jobs all your life and then suddenly you went off to try something else and it didn't work out. You just need to think to yourself, what did I learn from that role? What skills did I develop doing that I wouldn't have done if I hadn't done that?
I think sorry to interrupt, Lisa. I think that's an important point, because I had a conversation with a client recently who'd been made redundant because of COVID, but as a result of that, he then started working as a key worker, so working for supermarkets delivering food. And he said, well, this is not the job I want to do, and how much value does this add? But to me, if I was reading that, I would be impressed by the fact that the person had actually filled the time, and as you say, you learn something, you learn about customer service or timekeeping or whatever. And so I felt it was important that he kept that in the CV and didn't just miss it out.
Yeah, and I think the customer service thing is really important, because I think if you do something that's a bit different, or is something that you don't really want to return to, what you can demonstrate is, you've actually stepped outside your comfort zone, and you've been meeting people from a different customer base, if you like, and that showing your diversity and your flexibility and adaptability, but also the fact that if you're saying you're good at building relationships, or you're saying that you're good at communication, you're not just communicating and building relationships with the same people all the time, but you've actually diversified from that, and you can show evidence of that.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Somebody's just asked the question, Lisa, could you remind me what CAR and STAR stands for? And I know you picked up on that in terms of not wanting to say too much about the challenge or the situation, but it's the action. Do you want to just...
Yeah, so CAR is challenge, action, result, and STAR, situation, task, action, result. And what somebody told me recently was that they like to add another R on the end, which is relevance. So situation, task, action, result. The result was that it was 20% improvement, blah, blah, blah. And the relevance of that is, and so perhaps thinking, again, it's that, why am I telling you this? Why is that important?
Okay, thanks, Lisa. Two final questions. The first one can be answered, I think, reasonably quickly. It says, good morning, Fiona and Lisa. Perhaps in the minutiae, but what are your views on a picture on a CV? Serious, jovial, in between. I mean, with my HR hat on, I would say that in this country, it's not common practice to put a photo on a CV, because HR departments get very wary of being seen to show any bias, and a photograph could invite some sort of judgment on that person beforehand. So my view would be, in this country, do not put a photo on your CV. However, if you lived in America and you were applying for roles there, then it is common practice to put a photo on your resume. Or another example, my sister lives in France, and again, in France, it's common practice. But for this country, I would say no. Lisa, I don't know if you would.
No, I would agree. I would say no to a photo. If they really want to know what you look like, they can look you up on LinkedIn. Yeah. And then our advice would be, keep it professional. Jovial. By all means, smile. This isn't a passport photograph where you have to look serious. But don't wear a silly hat. Don't. It's not going to be a holiday snap or a wedding picture with your bride or groom chopped out. Try and look professional. And I think, yes, definitely smile. Make yourself look approachable and so on.
Lisa, you actually picked up on LinkedIn, and the final question is about LinkedIn. So bespoke CVs logical, But I suspect you then need to adjust your LinkedIn continuously also, and how close is the link between the CV and the LinkedIn. And somebody's also commented that they've worn funny hats for 33 years. So, but I would say on that one, your photo should not be you in your military uniform. But do you want to pick up on the link between the CV and LinkedIn?
I think that bespoke CV, of course, if you're applying for a job, you need to make your CV relevant for that job. But everyone will have a generic CV. And I think your LinkedIn is always going to be relatively generic, in line with that generic CV. So I think the short answer is no, you don't need to be constantly tweaking LinkedIn depending on what job you're applying for. Just make sure that your LinkedIn profile is generically acceptable for the broad, the broad idea of the type of roles that you are looking to go for. And your CV and your LinkedIn should broadly deliver the same message.
Okay, so just one final quick question, and somebody who's apologised because he's got to leave, but we are almost at the end anyway, but said thanks for a good presentation. But a quick question: should we use a normal Word format or download a good one from the internet? And thanks for a very good presentation. I mean, I don't know what you think, but my view is just keep it simple and stick to just normal Word format, because I know sometimes I've not been able to open a CV that somebody sent to me because it's in a different format, it's not Word, or when you try and print it out it goes all funny and the formatting is lost. So my view would be just stick to normal Word format, although I say you can get templates from the internet, but just be wary that if you use a different format, not everybody might have the same be able to pick it up in the same way when you send it to them.
Yeah, and I think just try not to make it too busy. If you like a slightly different format that you've seen on the internet, and it's quite clear and concise, that's fine. Just try not to have too many colours or too much contrast and too many tables and things like that, because that's where the formatting can go off. Equally, if you are going to turn your CV into a PDF format, which is an acceptable way, certainly when you're applying for a job, a lot of people send a PDF in. Just make sure that you look at that PDF and make sure that when it's turned from a Word document into PDF, it doesn't kind of go onto an extra page with one line on it or something like that, because I've seen that happening quite a lot.
Okay. Well, that's it, apart from a few people saying thank you very much. So glad that was of use, and a few people have already said that they'll be booking an appointment, which is great. So Lisa, it's been really good to work with you this morning, and let's hope that all our listeners are now going to come up with this winning CV that's going to get them a job. So goodbye to everybody, and hope to meet up with those of you who are going to make appointments.
Thanks very much to everyone for joining, and good luck with your job search.